Alicia Bennett stood behind the counter of the luxury boutique, her posture relaxed but her mind distant. The store was immaculate, with soft lighting that reflected off the polished marble floors and glittering displays of designer handbags and jewelry. The air was scented with an expensive fragrance that mingled with the quiet hum of classical music playing in the background. To any observer, Alicia looked like just another attentive sales assistant, her crisp uniform perfectly pressed, her expression calm and composed. She had been working at the boutique for several months now, learning the rhythm of the store and the preferences of its wealthy clientele. Her days were spent arranging merchandise, assisting customers, and making sure everything ran smoothly. It was a far cry from the life she had once led, but it provided her with a routine, a way to keep herself occupied and avoid the thoughts that haunted her when she was alone. Despite the luxurious surroundings, Alicia found little joy in her work. The opulence that surrounded her felt hollow, and the customers she served often looked through her as if she were invisible. She had grown accustomed to the dismissive glances, the sharp tones, and the haughty attitudes. Today seemed like any other, with the usual stream of well-heeled patrons browsing the racks, oblivious to the quiet sadness that lingered in Alicia's eyes. It was in the middle of this ordinary day that everything changed. The boutique's door swung open, and a woman stepped inside. She was dressed head to toe in designer clothing, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she walked. Her eyes swept over the store, landing on Alicia with a look of immediate disdain. The woman approached the counter with an air of superiority, her sharp eyes assessing Alicia with thinly veiled contempt. "You," she said, her voice cutting through the calm ambiance of the boutique. "Fetch me that handbag in the window, and make it quick." Alicia nodded politely, her practiced professionalism hiding the pang of irritation that flared within her. She retrieved the handbag, a sleek leather piece with gold accents, and placed it gently on the counter. The woman snatched it up without so much as a glance at Alicia, inspecting the bag with a critical eye. "Is this the best you have? I expected something more exclusive." Before Alicia could respond, the woman's sharp gaze turned back to her, narrowing with suspicion. "You seem a little too comfortable here for a mere salesgirl. What did you do before this? Clean houses? Or maybe something even less respectable?" Her tone dripped with condescension, her words designed to sting. Alicia felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but she kept her composure, refusing to let the woman's cruelty get under her skin. She had encountered many like her, people who judged others by their job titles, their appearances, or the color of their skin. "I'm here to help you find what you're looking for," Alicia said calmly, her voice steady despite the insult. "If this handbag doesn't meet your expectations, I'd be happy to show you other options." But the woman wasn't interested in handbags anymore. She leaned in closer, her voice lowering to a hiss. "You don't belong here. Women like you never do. I'm sure it's only a matter of time before they realize that and toss you out where you belong." Alicia's heart pounded in her chest, but she remained still, her expression neutral as she fought back the words she wanted to say. She had endured enough in her life to know that arguing with someone like this would only make things worse. But just as the woman's words were about to cut deeper, the sound of a familiar voice interrupted the tension. The door to the boutique swung open again, and a tall, distinguished man stepped inside. He was impeccably dressed, his tailored suit exuding wealth and power, but there was a warmth in his eyes that contrasted sharply with the coldness of the woman at the counter. As he surveyed the scene, his gaze landed on Alicia, and for a moment his eyes widened in recognition. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked, his tone polite but firm as he approached the counter. The woman turned to him, her attitude softening immediately when she saw his expensive attire and commanding presence. "Oh, no problem at all," she said sweetly, her demeanor shifting as she batted her eyelashes. "Just a little misunderstanding." The man didn't respond to her, his focus entirely on Alicia. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed uncomfortable," he said, addressing Alicia directly. "Are you all right?" Alicia hesitated, not wanting to cause a scene, but the man's genuine concern and the woman's previous cruelty made her feel safe enough to respond honestly. "It's nothing I can't handle," she said quietly, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. The man nodded, his expression softening. "I understand." He then turned to the woman, his tone taking on a sharper edge. You should be more careful with how you speak to people, especially when you don't know who they really are. The woman frowned, clearly confused and not used to being spoken to in such a manner. What do you mean? She demanded, her earlier arrogance creeping back into her voice. The man looked back at Alicia, his eyes full of respect and admiration. This woman is far more than what you see. She's one of the most talented journalists this city has ever known. Her work has changed lives, exposed corruption, and brought justice to those who needed it most. The woman's face paled as the truth of Alicia's identity began to sink in. She glanced back at Alicia, her eyes wide with shock and a touch of fear. Alicia stood frozen, the words echoing in her mind as the man revealed her past to the stunned woman. She hadn't expected anyone to recognize her, least of all in this place, where she had carefully maintained her anonymity. The luxury boutique was supposed to be her refuge, a place where she could hide from the world and from the pain of her mother's death. But now, as the truth hung in the air, she realized there was no hiding anymore. The woman's expression shifted from shock to discomfort, her earlier arrogance dissolving into unease. I had no idea, she stammered, her voice faltering as she glanced nervously between Alicia and the man. I didn't mean to, but the man cut her off, his voice calm but firm. It's easy to make assumptions, isn't it? To judge someone based on where they are, rather than who they are. But I think it's important to remember that everyone has a story, and sometimes that story is far more extraordinary than you could ever imagine. The woman's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and she quickly muttered an apology before turning and hurrying out of the boutique, leaving the handbags she had coveted behind. As the door closed behind her, the boutique fell into an uncomfortable silence, the tension lingering in the air. Alicia finally found her voice, turning to the man who had so unexpectedly defended her. You didn't have to do that, she said softly, her voice tinged with both gratitude and vulnerability. But thank you. The man smiled warmly, his eyes kind. I couldn't just stand by and let her speak to you that way, especially not knowing who you are. I've followed your work for years, Miss Bennett. Your articles have inspired me, and I know they've made a difference in the lives of so many. Alicia felt a wave of emotion rise within her, a mixture of pride and sorrow. It had been so long since she had been reminded of the impact she once had, of the life she had left behind. I'm not that person anymore, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I lost my way after my mother died. I didn't know how to keep going. The man nodded, his expression empathetic. Grief can take us to dark places, make us feel like we've lost ourselves. But I believe that who you are, who you truly are, never really goes away. It's still inside you, waiting for the right moment to reemerge. Alicia looked down, her eyes filling with tears as the man's words resonated deeply within her. For months, she had felt lost, disconnected from the person she once was. The grief over her mother's death had consumed her, leaving her adrift in a life that no longer felt like her own. But now, as she stood in the quiet boutique, she realized that perhaps the man was right. Maybe the journalist she had been, the fearless woman who had once pursued truth and justice with unwavering determination, was still there, buried beneath the layers of pain and loss. The man reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to decide anything right now, he said softly, but know that your voice is still needed. The world could use more people like you, Alicia, people who aren't afraid to speak out to make a difference. Alicia looked up at him, her tears threatening to spill over. She had been running from her past for so long, afraid to confront the person she had become in the wake of her mother's death. But in this moment, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back to the person she used to be. Thank you, she said again, her voice steadier this time. I'll think about what you've said. It means more to me than you know. The man smiled warmly, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before stepping back. Take all the time you need. Just remember that you have a gift, Alicia, and the world is a better place when you share it. With that, he gave her a nod and turned to leave the boutique, his presence as commanding in departure as it had been upon his arrival. Alicia watched him go, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over her. The encounter had been unexpected, but it had also been exactly what she needed. As the door closed behind the man, Alicia took a deep breath, the tension in her chest beginning to ease. She looked around the boutique, at the elegant displays and the opulent surroundings that had once felt so empty and meaningless. But now they seemed different somehow, less like a place to hide and more like a stepping stone on her journey back to herself. As the day wore on, Alicia found herself replaying the encounter in her mind, her thoughts swirling with a mix of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. The boutique was quiet now, the afternoon lull giving her a rare moment of solitude. She stood by the large glass window, watching the world outside, her reflection staring back at her. A woman who had once been so sure of herself, now grappling with the uncertainty of who she had become. The man's words echoed in her mind. Your voice is still needed. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her with such conviction, with such belief in her abilities. She had spent so many months feeling invisible, like a shadow of her former self, that she had almost forgotten what it was like to be seen, truly seen, for who she was. Alicia's thoughts drifted back to her mother, the woman who had been her anchor, her greatest supporter. Her mother had always encouraged her to be fearless, to use her voice to make a difference in the world. Losing her had felt like losing a part of herself, and Alicia had spiraled into a darkness that she hadn't known how to escape. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she could feel a glimmer of hope, an inkling that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back. The rest of the day passed in a blur, with customers coming and going, their interactions with Alicia routine and unremarkable. But beneath the surface, something had shifted within her. She found herself paying closer attention to the people she served, seeing them not just as customers, but as individuals with their own stories, their own struggles. The realization that she still had the ability to connect with others, even in this small way, began to stir something deep within her. By the time her shift ended, Alicia was emotionally exhausted but strangely energized. She closed up the boutique, locking the door behind her as she stepped out into the crisp evening air. The city buzzed around her, alive with the sounds of traffic and conversation. But Alicia felt a quiet sense of clarity amidst the chaos. Instead of heading straight home, Alicia found herself drawn to a place she hadn't visited in months, the small, quiet cemetery where her mother was buried. It was a place she had avoided since the funeral, unable to face the overwhelming grief that had consumed her. But tonight, something compelled her to go, to confront the emotions she had buried along with her mother. The cemetery was peaceful, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Alicia walked slowly between the rows of headstones, her heart heavy with memories. When she reached her mother's grave, she knelt down, her fingers tracing the engraved letters of her mother's name. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "I miss you so much, Mom." The floodgates opened, and Alicia allowed herself to cry, to release the pain she had been carrying for so long. She wept for her mother, for the loss of the life they had shared, and for the person she had been before everything fell apart. But as the tears flowed, she also felt a strange sense of release, as if the grief that had been suffocating her was finally beginning to lift. When the tears subsided, Alicia sat quietly by her mother's grave, her thoughts drifting back to the man in the boutique. His words had awakened something in her, a desire to reclaim the parts of herself that she had lost. She didn't know if she was ready to jump back into the world she had left behind, but she knew that she couldn't continue to live in the shadows. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever be the person I was before, but I think it's time I tried." The following morning, Alicia woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She couldn't ignore the feelings that had surfaced the day before, nor could she push away the lingering hope that had taken root in her heart. It wasn't much, but it was enough to propel her forward, to take the first steps toward reclaiming her life. Instead of heading straight to the boutique, Alicia made a detour to a small cafe she used to frequent when she was still working as a journalist. The cafe was a familiar comfort, a place where she had spent countless hours typing away on her laptop, lost in the excitement of her work. As she entered, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air, wrapping her in a warm embrace of nostalgia. She ordered a coffee and found a quiet corner by the window, her mind racing with thoughts of what her next move should be. The idea of returning to journalism felt daunting, but there was also a part of her that was excited by the prospect. For so long, she had been consumed by grief and self-doubt. but now she was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, she had the strength to find her way back. As she sipped her coffee, Alicia pulled out a notebook and pen from her bag. It had been months since she had written anything, but the urge to put her thoughts on paper was too strong to resist. She began to write, her words flowing more easily than she expected. She wrote about her mother, about the grief that had nearly swallowed her whole, and about the encounter in the boutique that had sparked something within her. With each word, Alicia felt herself reconnecting with the person she used to be, the journalist who had once been fearless in her pursuit of truth. It wasn't just about the stories she had written, it was about the impact she had made, the lives she had touched. As she filled the pages of her notebook, she realized that her story was far from over. It was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, Alicia continued to work at the boutique, but her mindset had shifted. She no longer saw the job as a means of hiding from the world, but rather as a stepping stone on her journey back to herself. She began to engage more with the customers, listening to their stories, their complaints, and their joys. In doing so, she found herself rediscovering the empathy and curiosity that had once made her a great journalist. She also spent more time writing, filling notebook after notebook with her thoughts, memories, and ideas for future stories. The act of writing was cathartic, helping her to process her grief and find a sense of purpose again. She wasn't sure where this path would lead her, but she knew she was ready to follow it wherever it might go. One evening, as she was closing up the boutique, Alicia received an unexpected call. It was the man from the boutique, the one who had recognized her, the one who had reminded her of the power of her voice. He invited her to dinner, not as a romantic gesture, but as an opportunity to discuss something important. Intrigued, Alicia accepted. At dinner, the man revealed that he was the founder of a nonprofit organization dedicated to social justice and media integrity. He had been following Alicia's career for years and had been inspired by her work. Now he wanted to offer her a position with the organization, a chance to use her skills as a journalist to make a difference once again. Alicia was taken aback by the offer. It was everything she had once dreamed of, a chance to return to her passion, to use her voice for good. But it was also terrifying. Could she really step back into that world after everything she had been through? The man seemed to sense her hesitation and spoke gently. I believe in you, Alicia. I've seen the impact you can make, and I think deep down, you know you're ready to make it again. Alicia looked at him, the fear and doubt warring within her. But then she thought of her mother, of the strength she had inherited from her, and of the spark that had been reignited in her heart. She had come so far, and now she had the chance to take the next step. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady and sure. I'm ready to start again. Alicia left the dinner feeling a mixture of exhilaration and fear. The offer she had accepted was monumental, a chance to step back into the world she had once dominated. But it was also daunting. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that the scars of her past would still surface, and that the doubts lingering in her mind would challenge her resolve. But for the first time in months, she felt alive, driven by a purpose that had once been the core of her being. In the days that followed, Alicia began preparing for her new role at the nonprofit organization. She reconnected with old contacts, dusted off her investigative skills, and started immersing herself in the issues she had once covered so passionately. It was a slow process, like learning to walk again after a long period of immobility, but each step forward reminded her of the fire that had fueled her career in the first place. Alicia's return to journalism wasn't just about writing stories. It was about reclaiming her voice, her identity, and the life she had lost in the wake of her mother's death. She found herself diving into research with renewed vigor, rediscovering the thrill of uncovering the truth and bringing hidden injustices to light. The work was challenging, but it was also fulfilling, giving her a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. Despite the progress she was making, there were still moments of doubt. The boutique, which had once been her sanctuary, now felt like a place of transition. Somewhere she didn't quite belong anymore, but wasn't ready to leave behind just yet. She continued to work there part-time, balancing her duties at the boutique with her new responsibilities at the nonprofit. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required her to navigate the emotional highs and lows of stepping back into her old life, while still grieving the one she had lost. But with each passing day, Alicia grew more confident in her abilities. She started writing articles again, each piece a testament to her resilience and her determination to use her voice for good. Her work was once again being noticed, shared, and praised. But this time, it wasn't just about the accolades. It was about making a difference, about giving a voice to those who had none, and about finding her own voice in the process. One afternoon, as Alicia was wrapping up her shift at the boutique, she received an unexpected visitor, an old colleague from her days as a journalist. He had heard about her new role at the nonprofit and had come to see her, both out of curiosity and concern. They hadn't spoken in over a year, not since she had abruptly left her job and disappeared from the media scene. "Alicia," he greeted her warmly, though his eyes were filled with questions. "It's good to see you. I heard you were back in the game, so to speak." Alicia smiled, though she could sense the underlying tension in his voice. "I am, slowly but surely. It's been a long road, but I'm getting there." Her colleague nodded, his expression softening. "We all missed you, you know. You were one of the best. It wasn't the same without you." The words, though kind, brought a pang of guilt to Alicia's heart. She had left without explanation, leaving her colleagues and friends to wonder what had happened to her. At the time, she hadn't been able to face them, let alone explain the depths of her grief. But now, standing in front of someone who had once been a part of her world, she realized that she needed to confront the past, to make peace with the choices she had made. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, meeting his gaze, "for leaving the way I did. I wasn't in a good place, and I didn't know how to handle it. I needed to disappear for a while." Her colleague reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. "You don't have to apologize, Alicia. We all understood, even if you didn't explain it at the time. Grief does that to people. It's not something you can just push through." Alicia felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to his words, the understanding and compassion in his voice easing the guilt she had been carrying. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." They talked for a while longer, reminiscing about the old days and catching up on each other's lives. It was a conversation that Alicia hadn't realized she needed, a reminder that she wasn't alone in her struggles, that there were people who cared about her and who had missed her presence. By the time they parted ways, Alicia felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected, a feeling that the wounds of the past were finally beginning to heal. With the past behind her and a renewed sense of purpose driving her forward, Alicia threw herself into her work at the nonprofit. She began tackling stories that resonated deeply with her, focusing on issues of social justice, inequality, and the struggles of marginalized communities. Each piece she wrote was a reflection of her own journey, her own fight to reclaim her identity and her voice. The articles gained traction quickly, with readers responding to the passion and authenticity that Alicia poured into her work. She was once again making waves in the media world, but this time, it wasn't about the recognition or the praise. It was about making a difference, about giving a platform to those whose voices had been silenced. And in doing so, Alicia found herself healing, piece by piece, word by word. Her work at the nonprofit also brought her into contact with people from all walks of life, activists, community leaders, and everyday individuals who were fighting for change. These interactions fueled her desire to continue her work, to push herself even further in her pursuit of truth and justice. She began to see her work not just as a job, but as a calling, a way to honor her mother's memory and the values she had instilled in her. The boutique, once a place of refuge, began to fade into the background of Alicia's life. She continued to work there part-time, but it was clear that her heart was no longer in it. The luxury and opulence that had once felt like a comforting cocoon now felt stifling, a reminder of the person she had been during her darkest days. It was time to move on, to fully embrace the new chapter of her life that was unfolding. One evening, after finishing a particularly emotional article, Alicia sat down and wrote her resignation letter. It was a bittersweet moment, but one that felt right. She had outgrown the boutique, and it was time to let go. With a sense of closure and determination, Alicia handed in her resignation the next day, ready to fully commit to the work that had reignited her passion for journalism. As Alicia's work continued to gain attention, she began to receive invitations to speak at events and participate in panel discussions. Her story of resilience, of overcoming grief and reclaiming her voice, resonated with many, and she found herself in the spotlight once again. But this time, the attention felt different, more purposeful, more meaningful. At one such event, a large conference focused on media integrity and social justice, Alicia was invited to share her journey with an audience of journalists, activists, and media professionals. As she stood on the stage looking out at the sea of faces before her, she felt a wave of emotions, nervousness, excitement, and a deep sense of fulfillment. She began her speech by acknowledging the difficulties she had faced, the loss of her mother, and the subsequent spiral into depression that had led her to step away from journalism. She spoke openly about the challenges of grief, about the isolation and self-doubt that had consumed her. But she also spoke about the hope that had eventually brought her back, the encounters and experiences that had reignited her passion for storytelling. The audience listened intently, many nodding in understanding, as Alicia shared her journey of healing and rediscovery. She emphasized the importance of using one's voice for good, of not letting the darkness of life's challenges silence the light within. And as she spoke, Alicia realized that she had truly come full circle, back to the person she had always been, but stronger and more resilient than before. The applause that followed her speech was thunderous, but Alicia's satisfaction came not from the accolades, but from the knowledge that her story had resonated with others. After the event, several attendees approached her, thanking her for her honesty in sharing their own stories of struggle and perseverance. It was a reminder that, despite the darkness she had faced, her voice still had the power to inspire and uplift others. As Alicia left the conference that evening, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The journey had been long and difficult, but she had emerged from it stronger, more determined, and more connected to her purpose than ever before. She knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but she also knew that she was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge that she had the strength to overcome anything life threw her way. Alicia's journey back to the world of journalism brought her not only personal fulfillment, but also opportunities she hadn't anticipated. Her work with the nonprofit gained significant attention, catching the eye of major media outlets and influential figures within the industry. They saw in her a voice that was both powerful and necessary, a journalist who had the courage to tackle difficult subjects with empathy and precision. One day, as Alicia was finishing up an article at her office, she received a phone call from an editor at one of the nation's leading news networks. The editor expressed admiration for her recent work and proposed an opportunity that left Alicia momentarily speechless: a position as the host of a new investigative documentary series. The show would focus on uncovering stories of social injustice, corruption, and the untold struggles of marginalized communities, exactly the kind of work that had once defined her career. The offer was as thrilling as it was daunting. Hosting a documentary series would place Alicia in front of the camera, rather than behind the scenes where she had always felt most comfortable. It would also mean a return to the public eye on a scale she hadn't experienced since before her mother's death. The thought of such visibility brought with it a mix of excitement and anxiety, but Alicia couldn't ignore the part of her that longed to take on the challenge. The editor reassured her that she would have full creative control over the series, allowing her to choose the stories she felt were most important to tell. It was an opportunity to not only make an impact, but to do so on her own terms. After a thoughtful conversation, Alicia agreed to meet with the network executives to discuss the project further. Later that evening, as Alicia sat at home reflecting on the day's events, she felt the familiar pull of excitement she had once associated with her work. The prospect of reaching a wider audience, of using her platform to shed light on critical issues, filled her with a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. She knew that accepting the offer would be a significant step forward, one that would require her to confront her fears and fully embrace the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and preparations as Alicia moved forward with the documentary series. The network was eager to begin production, and Alicia found herself immersed in the planning process, brainstorming topics, researching stories, and assembling a team of talented journalists and filmmakers to bring her vision to life. It was exhilarating, but also overwhelming as the reality of what she was undertaking began to sink in. One afternoon during a particularly intense production meeting, Alicia found herself doubting her decision. The pressure was immense, and the responsibility of delivering a successful series weighed heavily on her. She began to wonder if she was truly ready for this, if she could live up to the expectations that had been placed on her shoulders. The thought of failing, of letting down those who believed in her, gnawed at her confidence. Sensing her unease, one of her colleagues, a seasoned producer who had worked on numerous successful documentaries, pulled her aside after the meeting. "Alicia," he said gently, "I can see that you're feeling the weight of this project, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this. We're all here because we believe in your vision, and we're committed to making this series the best it can be. You've already proven yourself as a journalist. This is just the next chapter." His words were a balm to Alicia's frayed nerves. She realized that she wasn't alone in this endeavor. She had a team of professionals who shared her passion and who were there to support her every step of the way. The fear of failure began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. She had taken a leap of faith by accepting this opportunity, and now it was time to trust herself and her abilities. With the support of her team, Alicia threw herself into the work with renewed vigor. She spent long hours researching and interviewing, determined to uncover the stories that needed to be told. The process was demanding, but it was also deeply fulfilling, reigniting the fire that had once driven her career. The more she immersed herself in the work, the more she realized that this was exactly where she was meant to be. After months of preparation, the day finally arrived for the premiere of the first episode of Alicia's documentary series. The episode focused on a small, overlooked community struggling with the effects of environmental injustice, a topic that had long been ignored by mainstream media. Alicia had spent weeks embedded in the community, interviewing residents, documenting their stories, and shining a light on the injustices they faced daily. The premiere was a high-profile event attended by industry professionals, activists, and members of the media. Alicia stood backstage, her heart pounding as she listened to the murmurs of the audience gathering in the theater. Despite the nerves that fluttered in her stomach, she felt a deep sense of pride in the work she and her team had accomplished. This was more than just a television show. It was a platform for change, a voice for the voiceless. As the lights dimmed and the episode began to play on the big screen, Alicia watched from the wings, her breath catching as the opening scenes unfolded. The visuals were powerful, the stories compelling, and the impact undeniable. The audience was silent, captivated by the stories being told, the raw emotion and the stark reality of the situation hitting them with full force. When the episode ended, the theater erupted in applause. Alicia stepped onto the stage to address the audience, her emotions a whirlwind of relief, pride, and gratitude. She spoke briefly about the importance of the stories they had just witnessed, about the need for continued advocacy and action. The applause grew louder, a clear signal that her message had resonated. After the event, Alicia was approached by several attendees who expressed their admiration for her work. Among them were representatives from advocacy groups, community leaders, and even a few government officials, all eager to discuss how they could collaborate on future projects. Alicia was overwhelmed by the response, but also deeply moved by the validation of her efforts. As she left the theater that night, Alicia felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond personal success. She had taken a risk by stepping back into the spotlight, by using her platform to tell difficult, often uncomfortable truths. But the impact was undeniable, and she knew that this was just the beginning of what she could achieve. With the success of the first episode, Alicia's confidence continued to grow. The series gained momentum, with each subsequent episode delving into new and critical issues, from racial injustice to economic disparity to the systemic failures affecting vulnerable populations. The stories were difficult to tell, often requiring Alicia to confront her own emotions and biases, but they were also necessary, shining a light on the dark corners of society that so often went ignored. As the series progressed, Alicia found herself becoming not just a host, but an advocate, a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. She became deeply involved in the causes she covered, working alongside activists and community leaders to push for change. Her work began to extend beyond the screen, influencing policy discussions and inspiring grassroots movements. It was everything she had once dreamed of, and more. But amid the professional triumphs, Alicia also reached a personal milestone that she had been quietly working towards for months. She decided to visit her mother's grave once more, this time with a different purpose. The first time she had visited, she was lost in grief, seeking closure and a way to move forward. But now she was ready to share her journey with the woman who had been her guiding light. On a bright sunny afternoon, Alicia made her way to the cemetery, carrying with her a small bouquet of her mother's favorite flowers. As she knelt by the grave, she placed the flowers gently on the ground and sat in quiet reflection. The pain of her loss was still there, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, she felt a deep sense of peace, of knowing that her mother's spirit lived on in the work she was doing. "Mom," she whispered, her voice steady but emotional, "I've found my way back. I'm doing what I love again, what you always believed I could do. And I'm making a difference, just like you wanted me to. I miss you every day, but I know you're with me, guiding me, just like you always did." Alicia sat in silence for a while, letting the memories wash over her, feeling a connection to her mother that transcended time and space. She knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she was on the right path. She had reclaimed her voice, her purpose, and her identity, and she was ready to continue the work that had once defined her. As the documentary series continued to gain acclaim, Alicia found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker, mentor, and thought leader within the media industry. Her story of resilience and determination had resonated with many, inspiring a new generation of journalists and activists to pursue their own paths with courage and conviction. Alicia began to mentor young reporters, sharing her experiences and offering guidance to those just starting out in their careers. She emphasized the importance of empathy, integrity, and the willingness to tackle difficult subjects, no matter the personal cost. Her mentees looked up to her, not just as a successful journalist, but as someone who had faced adversity and emerged stronger on the other side. Her work also led to partnerships with various advocacy organizations, where she used her platform to amplify their efforts and bring attention to the issues they were fighting for. Alicia became a powerful advocate for media integrity, speaking out against the dangers of misinformation and the need for journalists to uphold the highest ethical standards. She also pushed for greater diversity and representation in the media, recognizing the importance of having voices from all walks of life contribute to the narrative. As her influence grew, Alicia was approached by a major publishing house with an offer to write a memoir. The book would chronicle her journey, from her rise as a journalist to the depths of her depression after her mother's death, and finally to her triumphant return to the field. It was an opportunity to share her story with an even wider audience, to inspire others who might be facing their own struggles. At first, Alicia was hesitant. Writing a memoir would mean revisiting some of the most painful moments of her life, laying bare her vulnerabilities for the world to see. But as she reflected on the idea, she realized that her story could serve as a beacon of hope for others. If her journey could help even one person find their way through darkness, it would be worth it. With that in mind, Alicia agreed to the project. She spent the next year pouring her heart into the manuscript, recounting her experiences with honesty and raw emotion. The process was cathartic, allowing her to confront her past in a way she hadn't before. As she wrote, she found herself gaining a deeper understanding of her own resilience, of the strength that had carried her through even the darkest times. When the memoir was finally published, it was met with critical acclaim. Readers praised Alicia for her candidness, her willingness to share both her triumphs and her struggles. The book became a bestseller, further solidifying her place as a leading voice in both journalism and the broader conversation about mental health and recovery. The success of the memoir brought Alicia full circle, allowing her to reflect on how far she had come. She had started as a young, ambitious journalist with a passion for uncovering the truth, and despite the obstacles she had faced, she had found her way back to that passion. But now she was more than just a journalist. She was a survivor, an advocate, and a mentor to those who followed in her footsteps. As the years went by, Alicia continued to expand her influence, not just in journalism, but in the broader social and cultural landscape. She established a foundation in her mother's name, dedicated to supporting young journalists from marginalized communities and promoting ethical reporting. The foundation offered scholarships, mentorship programs, and resources to help aspiring journalists navigate the challenges of the industry. The work of the foundation became one of Alicia's proudest achievements, a way to honor her mother's legacy while giving back to the profession that had given her so much. Through the foundation, Alicia met countless young people who reminded her of herself in her early days, eager, passionate, and determined to make a difference. Guiding them, watching them grow and succeed, brought her a deep sense of fulfillment. One evening, after a particularly rewarding day at the foundation, Alicia sat in her home office, surrounded by mementos of her career, a framed cover of her best-selling memoir, awards from her journalistic achievements, and photographs of the many people whose lives she had touched. As she looked around the room, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced her demons, reclaimed her voice, and built a life that was meaningful and impactful. But more than that, she had learned to carry her mother's spirit with her, to draw strength from the love and guidance that had shaped her into the woman she had become. Her journey had been long and difficult, filled with both triumphs and heartaches, but it had led her to a place of acceptance and fulfillment. Alicia's story didn't end with her personal successes. As she continued to build on her achievements, she remained focused on the bigger picture, on the impact she could have on the world around her. She knew that her legacy would not be measured by the awards she had won or the accolades she had received, but by the lives she had touched and the change she had inspired. In her later years, Alicia transitioned from active journalism to a more advisory role, focusing on her foundation and working with other organizations to promote media literacy and social justice. She became a sought-after speaker, sharing her insights at conferences, universities, and public forums. Her voice, once nearly silenced by grief, now resonated across the world, influencing the next generation of journalists, activists, and leaders. Alicia also took time to nurture her personal life, reconnecting with friends and family, and finding joy in the simple pleasures of life. She had come to understand that while her work was important, so too were the relationships that sustained her, the people who had supported her through her darkest times and celebrated with her in her successes. As she looked back on her life, Alicia knew that she had lived fully and authentically. She had faced challenges that might have broken others, but she had emerged stronger, more determined, and more compassionate. Her story was one of resilience, of finding light in the darkest places, and of using that light to guide others. Alicia's legacy, in the end, was one of strength and courage, qualities she had inherited from her mother and had cultivated in herself. She had turned her pain into purpose, her loss into love, and her voice into a powerful force for good. And in doing so, she had not only reclaimed her own life, but had also paved the way for others to do the same.